Our access, our relationship to our Creator should be direct. The church organization isn't going to die out entirely, but we may certainly get the impression that that's what's happening. Let's ask ourselves, what was or what is her finest hour? Well, many times in history, there are periods or there are developments where a people look back and they recognize that during the crisis or during the trial that they went through, they identify what they call their finest hour. One in particular, of course, is the well-known occasion where Britain was under attack back in the 1940s, and they held off with barely enough to do the job. But it was recognized as their finest hour, where so few made a tremendous difference. There's an old adage that says when times of stress or challenge, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. It was said that if the British Empire should last 1,000 years, they will say, this was her finest hour. Who knows? There may be another that would prompt that assessment. The Church of God has existed for a couple of thousand years. Let's ask ourselves, what was or what is her finest hour? Jesus mentioned that a city set on a hill cannot be hid. And we can read that in Matthew 5:14. Now that can go either way. A city on a hill is very noticeable. But at the same time, it's very vulnerable. Because the enemies know where we are. You can't be hidden when you're right up there for all to see. And we could say that about the people of God. As long as we're active, as long as we're doing what God has asked us to do, we too are cities or entities set in a prominent place for all to see. And as a result, we can become targets. This particular city, let's say the church, has endured continuing persecutions throughout history. And perhaps we could say, except for this generation here in this country, because persecutions are ongoing all over the world, we don't have that situation all that much, not compared to other places. But will it continue? Can we look forward to our peaceful time as we know it now on through to the end? I seriously doubt that. Things are going to be happening. Things are going to come to pass that are going to put great pressures upon us, both collectively and especially individually. And I think we've lived enough to realize how that potential exists. Jesus Christ said, "This generation shall not pass away until or before the end time." Now, what does that really mean? We can think of it as a fading church attendance, a fading membership, where more people are leaving for health reasons, for longevity, than are coming in. That can happen. Many churches in this world today are facing a similar thing, certainly no less ourselves. We can identify with that. We can appreciate the fact that the people of God are under various stresses. One being simply life longevity. More people are leaving the scene for whatever reason than are coming into it. But the question is, and we can sort of perceive that from what Jesus said about this generation not passing away, will the open doors of opportunity remain until all these things that were written are fulfilled? In Revelation chapter 3, it talks about Philadelphia is shown to have an open door. Now, it's interesting the way it's worded, and we can certainly make a connection with the last couple of decades where we had an open door that was closed. But then, in the final words of the message, are left open again. He has set before us an open door. Now that to me would suggest that our former efforts were closed out, but another opportunity was opened to those of us who remain faithful. But then we move into the letter to the next church, where we find the door again appears closed. But in that situation, it's closed from the inside. He says, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man will open. So there's a closed door there, but that one is closed from within. What kind of a parallel can we place against that in the world that we live in today? In John 9:4, Jesus talked about a night fast approaching. There's going to come a time when no one can work. Now that should give us a sense of urgency if we really believe what he's talking about. Because, logically, looking around, we would say, yes, that's probably the case. There is a darkness coming. With all of the things going on, with all the political machinations, with all the apostasies, with all of the control, mind control, media control, we can easily perceive that there is going to be a time of darkness. The night is coming. So where does that leave us? What should we be doing? Knowing that that is going to be the situation. Each of us who are called of God needs to bring such urgency to the forefront in our lives. Each of us needs to be increased in motivation, in sincerity, and in effectiveness. The point is, we need to be doing something with what we're given. We need to follow and to be energized by God's Spirit, which is a unique and essential resource. There's things we couldn't possibly do except through the power of God's Spirit in us. We're a minor entity. The world might consider us as simply religious bumpkins. That's what they would think of us. But we are given the task. We are poised, if we want to take advantage of what we're given, we are poised to do the end time work. Who else is going to do it? People that don't know? Each of us needs to be increasingly involved with ideas, with self-analysis, with prayer, with mutual encouragement. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it talks about this kind of thing. 1 Thessalonians 5. Starting at about verse 16. And here's some of the things that it tells us we should be doing. Rejoice evermore. Pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Quench not the Spirit. Despise not prophesying. Prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. Abstain from all appearance of evil. And the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. And I pray, God, your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Faithful is he that calls you, who also will do it. Now there's an outline of things that are minimum in our personal lives. But the important thing to notice is he's saying he will do it. We can try, we can do our best, but it's God's Spirit that will make all of these valid before him and effective before him. One great ongoing mistake that we find in the churches of God is over the matter of identity. And this can reduce our effectiveness as servants of God greatly. The matter of identity. With whom, with what do we identify? There's people who think that salvation is assured, that their salvation is enhanced by such identification. There's so many that do that. Let's understand something. Salvation is separate from just affiliation. There's people that think simply because they're in the right church, they're going to float on through. No problems. Affiliation doesn't function as a substitute for personal diligence and initiative. People who are what we could call clingers on, as opposed to active producers. In other words, people we know as simply chair occupiers. There's no shortage of those. But what about the laborers? Some people's best attribute is their organizational loyalty. Not that they do really do anything, but they just simply identify. Organizations have within them zealous people, as well as people who are spiritually stagnant. And we need to evaluate ourselves. Where do we fall in that spectrum? Just being in a particular organization does nothing to assure the individual of anything, really. In 1 Corinthians, and it's the first 3 chapters, but I'll hit some highlights there. 1 Corinthians, let's start with chapter 1, verse 11. It brings out this phenomenon, and it was well known in that day as well. It's not something new. It's not something that's come to be simply because of what's happened in the last generation. Verses 11 and 12, 1 Corinthians 1, 11 and 12. And here the Apostle Paul is evaluating the church in Corinth. And he says to them, "For it has been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you. Now this I say, that every one of you says, I am of Paul." They identify with Paul. What's wrong with Paul? Not a thing. "And I of Apollos, and I of Cephas." And then there's some that say, "But I am of Christ." What's the problem there? They're identifying with a person, and it could be just as well identifying with an organization, where their focus is in the wrong place. It divides the people of God in ways that shouldn't happen. In verse 14, he goes on to say, "I thank God that I baptized none of you but Crispus and Gaius, lest any should say that I had baptized in mine own name." Okay? You see, the problem is identifying with a particular person in this case, a prominent minister in this case. But that carries forward into the modern age, because people can do the same thing with organizations. They see Christ. They see access to Christ through a particular organization. Now, there's a certain amount of merit there, but that's not really how it should be. Our access, our relationship to our Creator should be direct. And our affiliation should simply be the forum in which we perform those services for Christ. That's what they provide us, an opportunity to serve as a group. But that's not usually how it is. These groups tend to isolate themselves from one another. A like believer is no better than an unbeliever in many people's sights, and that is so strange. How can that be? What is the mentality that brings that to the fore? Paul asks, "Are you not carnal?" And he's right to ask that question. Let's go on to chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. And you can read through these entire 3 chapters, and you'll see the theme that he's bringing out here. I'm just skipping ahead, and let's go to the conclusion that he's coming to. "And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as unto babes in Christ." These people were spiritually immature. No matter how solidly they identified with Paul or Apollos or Cephas, they really didn't get it. Paul says, "I have fed you with milk and not with meat. For hitherto you were not able to bear it, neither yet now are you able. For you are yet carnal. For whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are you not carnal, and walk as men? For while one says, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are you not carnal?" That's his point. No matter how religious they were, no matter how devoted to their organization they were, no matter their perceived stature of themselves, they were still carnal. That was Paul's assessment. And it's something that we need to place ourselves in that same picture. Are we exhibiting any of that kind of carnality? And it's an unusual kind of carnality, because it's in an area that should never be like that. It's in an area where we ought to be like one another in belief and practice and in affiliation. What do we say of these groups who believe as we do, for the most part, and the only real difference is their organizational structure that they identify with? What's God's opinion of that kind of thing? And you'll encounter it if you attend in other groups. I've encountered it a couple of times. One group says, they're asked, what's the difference between you and this other group who believes exactly the same so far as anyone can determine? And their answer was, well, we're right and they're wrong. I mean, this is the ministry saying that kind of thing. Why? Well, it helps them preserve their exclusiveness, their isolation from exposure to other groups. Now, if the other groups aren't on track doctrinally, that's a whole different issue. But I'm saying among those that are pretty much identical, who live in that realm that people say you can't find a dime's worth of difference. And there's many groups where you could say that. What's the feeling? Someone here asked another leader in a similar believing group, why can't we be together? And the answer was, we need to be doing the work, not getting together, I guess is the background statement there. I mean, come on. How do we explain, before our Creator, how do we explain that kind of attitude, that kind of approach to like-believing people, who we regard as almost in the same manner that we would with an unbeliever? We don't treat a Protestant on the street the same way we would some of these people. We shared a feast site with another like-believing group. Interesting stories there. But here's the thing. Paul is asking, is this not an example of carnality? Which it is. We can do that personally. We can do that organizationally. And this kind of thing may account for the incessant political divisions among our belief system. It's a sad story. God wants us to get with His message and quit with the organizational fixations. How different would it be if we were all pulling the wagon in the same direction? It's in this area that we independents have one advantage, because we can get ourselves oriented properly. Christ is the master. That isn't expressed in all organizational structures. A lot of times they look to the leader. They look to the organizational structure itself. But even a small congregation is a mini organization, and it can exhibit internally some of the same attitudes and responses. There are organizations that within themselves function as smother blankets on personal growth. I think we've experienced that personally. I know I have. Proclaiming God's truth was not a virtue. It was reacted very negatively towards that. Why? What's the reason? How do you explain that? Jesus said, where two or three are gathered together, I will be among them. And then in New King James it says, I am there in the midst. How could that be justified outside of an organizational framework? It doesn't appear that he thinks along that line at all. The organizations are not our salvation provider, nor are they our spiritual retirement center, which is another factor we need to think about. Is there anyone analyzing our current organizational problems? Is there anyone that's going to explain what's happening and why it's happening? What's being done to address the situation? why can't we overlap? Why can't we affiliate with? Why can't we fellowship with other like believers freely? Now, that's not our problem, but you'll find it in most of the organizations. There's one that's rather liberal in that respect, but there's others that are increasingly rigid. What does God think about that? Do we think the same way, is the question. Will there be an effort to regain people's confidence and draw them back? That's another factor. People become disillusioned for whatever reason. Sometimes interpersonal problems, sometimes their own problems. A lot of times that's more the case. How do we deal with that? Do we reach out? Do we spiritually embrace those that are struggling? Because that certainly is part of the commission that we're given. Totalitarian organizations can provide the environment leading to doctrinal misdirection. And we've seen some of that, have we not? Controlling organizations can provide the environment for suppression of personal growth. Someone who's growing, someone who's stepping out and doing things on their own a little bit, they'll be clamped down. Now, here's another phenomenon, and we can think of a number of situations. But the great exalted leader can be given a bogus revelation by God to test his fellowship. Now, it tests the exalted leader as well, because there's a humility problem. But what happens when the people see that there is an error, minor or otherwise, that's developed? What do the people do about it? Because congregations, and we don't often let this happen as often as it should, but congregations have an important role to play. Too few people are inclined to do so, to our shame. Matthew 7, verse 16. Now we know this, but do we practice it? He says, "You shall know them," speaking of religious leaders, "you shall know them by their fruits." Now, to do that, we have to evaluate their fruits, do we not? Are we doing that as a body? Because you see, the body should be overseeing what's going on before the congregation and with the congregation. Where is it leading it? You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? You got to look at the plant. Down to verse 20, same thing. By their fruits you shall know them. That is a mandate upon God's people. It's not the leadership that does all that, but it's those subject to that leadership that need to be evaluating where it's all going. Are we too focused on personalities? Are we too focused on organizations to where we can't self-correct? Do you see the danger there? Typically, the ministry tends to be concerned for prestige, power, and in many cases, a paycheck. In what order is a question sometimes, but those are the primary considerations. Holding their people, that's the power move. Being up before their congregation, that is the prestige mode. And of course, the paycheck. The professional ministry is concerned for the congregation only to the degree that it provides them these things. And I hate to admit it, but our former culture prepared us well for doing nothing. Let the leadership carry it. Pray and pay, but with an underbreath, you have no say. Remember that? Not only in how things were to be done, but in actually the saying of it. Which splinter or organization operates any differently, other than perhaps a few independents? I started this with the question is, what is our finest hour? Has it already passed? Is it a point in history that we can look back to as to how the church endured the various trials that have come? Reticent people are likely to say, yeah, that was the finest hour back then. I'm more inclined to believe that likely it's yet ahead of us. In Revelation chapter 6, it talks about the end time martyrdom of saints. There are an entity of individuals who have been martyred in the past, who are held under the altar, and they're told to wait, go back to sleep, wait until your brethren who are to be martyred will be martyred as you were. Now that tells us something. How do we evaluate that in the context of our current situation? We'd be inclined to conclude that troubled times are coming like we haven't thought about. There are going to be martyrdoms in the end time, in the last days. And what might provoke some of that is found in Revelation chapter 11, which is a description of the two witnesses. We tend to think these are going to be great evangelists. They're going to be out there winning souls for Jesus. I kind of think not. I don't know that God is going to be calling a great mass of people at that point in time. I'm more inclined to think they're just going to tell the people their sins, explain to them the troubles that are coming, why they're coming, what's wrong, what needs to be done. But I don't think we're going to see massive baptisms. I kind of doubt it. I think their work is going to be on a different plane entirely. Now that brings around the question, then when they're doing that, what of us? Because we're going to be put in a position to endorse these people, to support these people, verbally and who knows how many different ways. We're going to be identified with them. We're that city on the hill again, supporting, praising, second stating what they're saying. We're going to be affirming their message ourselves individually. What kind of targets will that make of us? We have many members who see themselves as potted plants around the tree. Question is, well, Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail, which means the church organization isn't going to die out entirely, but we may certainly get the impression that that's what's happening. Paul calls church members the pillars and grounds of the truth. We're supposed to uphold the truth, that's the pillar, and be the grounds of the truth, that is the guy wires or ropes that support that upright tent stake. Pillars and grounds of the truth. People who are simply potted plants around the perimeter of that tree. What happens when the tree fails? When it falls? In Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, he says, I have set before you an open door. What does that mean? What is that telling us about our current situation? He set before us an open door. Do we recognize the open door? And if we did, what are we going to do with it? In Amos chapter 8, verse 11, he says there's going to come a famine of the word. That's the way we tend to think of it. There's going to be a famine of the word. No, it actually says there's going to be a famine of the hearing of the word. Not that there's a complete absence of the word, but perhaps we could say an undersupply. But the truth is out there. It's more available now than it ever was, but who's accessing it? Who cares to listen to it? It isn't so much a matter of availability, it's a matter of being willing to hear it. You can find that out. Just go to your religious friends. Start a conversation with them. Talk about the 3 days and 3 nights. Talk about the rapture. Talk about Sunday. Talk about pagan holidays. Talk about heaven and hell. What kind of reception are you going to get? Are they willing to hear? You see, the famine is also in the hearing. In our generation, let's say, we were exposed to the tail end of what was called the Great Awakening. And that was from the 1700s into the early 1940s, the Great Awakening. People began to become religiously aware in ways that they hadn't been before. Prominent evangelists and preachers like D.L. Moody, Jonathan Edwards, Miller, Spurgeon, Wesley, all of these shaped modern theology in various ways. I'm not saying they were accurate. I'm just saying they reinvigorated people's awakening to spiritual matters. Oh, we came in on the tail end of that. The Miller movement, for example, in the 1840s, went on to spin off a number of organizations, some of which were the Adventists, and some of which were the Church of God. And we, as a tail end manifestation of the Church of God movement, encountered an individual who was willing to refute the common belief systems. And we know that story. We know what those issues were. He was a revolutionary. I'm not saying perfect in every respect. I'm not saying right in every teaching. I'm just saying he moved the needle back towards where it ought to be. We had a chance to review erroneous beliefs and put them more on a correct path. In Daniel 12, it talks about a time coming when the power of the holy people will be scattered. That's Daniel 12, verse 7. The New King James has completely shattered, where one says, where King James says scattered. But it doesn't say that it's going to be completely shut down. Think about the 2 witnesses. There's going to be another great awakening, but of an entirely different sort, because there are going to be representatives of the message that Jesus Christ wants presented before the world that isn't being presented right now. Certainly not with the power that it's going to be. The whole world is going to be aware of these two and what they're saying. They're not going to like it. They're going to want to kill them, and they eventually will. But they're going to be set on a world stage. They're going to dominate the news cycles for years. There is some encouragement, because I think in this particular point in time, we have a reference in Daniel chapter 11 that talks about this. And this should be on our minds, because I have a feeling we're going to be set in this particular picture. Daniel 11, 32 to 35. And we know the time frame of this. But it says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant. This is specifically targeting the covenant people. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people who really do know their God shall be strong and shall do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many shall cleave unto them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. I think that passage right there gives us a good indication of what will be our finest hour. The question is, how are we going to exhibit ourselves in that situation? Are we up to it? Will we be examples of faith that are called for to do exploits, even in the face of martyrdom, persecution, whatever, deprivations of all sorts? Are we up to it? At the moment, let's consider another possibility. Let's go back to our question. What is our finest hour? How many more times are we going to be at this stage? We have radio broadcast opportunity. We're supporting that locally. We have a decent, respectable accommodation. Do you know how many church organizations don't have anything like this? We take it for granted. We have a feast venue every year. We have an accumulation of messages that goes back a quarter century that can be accessed online or by CDs or whatever. We have an extended tither base. We have many people who provide us support from the outside who aren't local, but they like what they see here. We have an African work. We, to some degree, support what's going on there, those who believe and teach as we do. There are dedicated servants there and here. We have booklets and literature, multi-level orientation. We're aimed at people that are new to the faith and people that are long time in the faith. We have a speaker base here that for our low numbers is enviable. Many churches with more people than this don't have the speaker base that we have. We have media connection. We have 3 websites. We have a webcast potential. This is going to be going out on YouTube. There is so much. Is this also our finest hour. The question is, are we going to make the most of it? Because this isn't going to go on forever. It just is not. In John 9, chapter 4, Jesus says, "Work, for the night is coming when no man can work." That should not be a surprise to anyone. There's a great push for a one-world government, and let's understand, to the degree that that's implemented, we are going to be the targets of any one-world government movement that there is. I would say there's nothing currently that prevents us from doing God's work except personal lethargy. Blessed is the man when the Lord comes, shall he find so doing.